She had spent years pretending the silence didn't bother her. The empty chairs at the dinner table, the long evenings with only the soft hum of the refrigerator to keep her company, the mornings where no one said her name, it had become normal. Expected. But just because something is familiar doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. At 75, Evelyn had grown used to being alone. Too used to it. And yet, every day, the weight of it pressed a little heavier on her chest. She never planned to live her later years this way. There was a time, long ago, when she imagined growing old surrounded by friends, by laughter, by people who knew her deeply. She had been a dreamer as a child, always imagining big things, adventures, travels, joyful moments shared with others. But life had taken her down a different road. A road of responsibilities, of raising children, of working hard, of losing people she loved. One by one, the people who filled her world slowly slipped away. Some moved on, others passed on, until one day she looked around and realized how small her world had become. Evelyn didn't dislike solitude at first. There was peace in it. She filled her days with books, with tending her plants, with quiet walks through the neighborhood. But as the years stretched on, the peace turned to emptiness. She found herself lingering in places longer, just to feel the presence of others. The grocery store, the post office, even the waiting room at the doctor's office, all became spaces where she could feel, even for a few moments, that she wasn't invisible. She didn't want to admit that she was lonely. It felt like defeat, like admitting she had somehow failed at this stage of life. People said old age was for rest, for contentment, for reflection. But Evelyn didn't feel content. She felt unfinished. And more than anything, she felt afraid. Afraid that this, the quiet, the waiting, was all that was left. But what Evelyn didn't know was that her story wasn't done. Not yet. And what happened next would show her that even in the loneliest hearts, joy can still find a way in. She didn't want to be alone anymore. If you're still here, maybe you felt that too. Maybe you're waiting for your own story to take an unexpected turn. Subscribe and stay with us, because sometimes life surprises us when we least expect it. As a child, Evelyn would sit by the window of her small bedroom, chin resting on her hand, eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the fields. The world outside seemed so big, so full of places she had never seen. She would imagine herself on trains, on ships, even in the sky, flying far away to places where the streets were different, the people spoke in soft, unfamiliar voices, and every day brought something new. Her favorite book was an old atlas her father had found at a second-hand shop. The pages were worn, the colors faded, but to Evelyn, they were alive. She would trace her fingers over the lines of rivers, the curves of mountains, the dots of distant cities. Someday, she promised herself, she would go. Someday, she would see it all. But childhood dreams often wait quietly while life takes over. Her family didn't have much. Her father worked long hours at the factory, and her mother took in sewing to help make ends meet. Evelyn learned early that dreams were something you kept in your heart, not something you spoke about too loudly. She never complained. She helped where she could, took care of her younger siblings, and did well in school. But on quiet nights, when the house was still, she would pull out the atlas and imagine again. Places like the Grand Canyon, or New York City, or the beaches of California, they felt like magic, waiting for her, if only she could find a way. As she grew older, those dreams didn't disappear. They just got smaller, tucked into corners of her mind as she stepped into adulthood. She married young, to a man who worked hard and loved her in his own quiet way. They raised 2 children, built a home filled with routines, with ordinary joys and ordinary struggles. There was never time, never money, never a good reason to go anywhere far. Someday, she would tell herself, when the kids are older, when we have more saved, when life slows down. But life never really slowed down. It moved forward, steady and relentless, pulling her along. Her husband passed when she was just past 60, and though the grief was deep, it was the loneliness that settled more permanently. Her children visited when they could, called often, but their lives were full, as they should be. Evelyn didn't want to be a burden. She filled her time with small things, the garden, her books, old movies that made her smile. And yet, sometimes, late at night, She would pull the atlas from its place on the shelf and open to the pages she had once loved. The lines were even more faded now, but the dream still flickered, faint but alive. Maybe someday. But she was 75 now. And dreams, she thought, belonged to the young. The days had begun to blur together. Each morning, Evelyn would rise at the same time, her small alarm clock buzzing faintly in the early light. She didn't need it anymore. Not really. Her body had learned the rhythm of solitude all on its own. She would put the kettle on, prepare her single cup of tea, and sit by the window, watching the world wake up without her. The street was quiet, lined with trees that whispered in the breeze, and occasionally a neighbor would walk by, but they rarely looked up. She had lived in this house for over 40 years, yet somehow it felt less like home and more like a place she was simply waiting in. She would fill her mornings with chores, washing dishes that barely filled the sink, tending to her garden even when there wasn't much to do, rearranging small objects just to feel that something had changed. But it hadn't. Not really. The hours stretched long and slow, and though she never said it aloud, Evelyn had begun to fear them. Fear the weight of another day with no one to share it with. Her children called, of course. Every Sunday, like clockwork. Her daughter's voice was bright and hurried, filled with stories of her own grandchildren, of work, of life in the city. Her son would check in too, ask how she was feeling, if she needed anything. Evelyn always said the same things. "I'm fine, darling. Everything's just fine." She didn't want them to worry. Didn't want to pull them from their lives just because hers had become so small. But at night, when the darkness wrapped around her house, she would lie awake and feel it, the ache of time passing, the loneliness curling itself around her like an old friend she wished she could send away. She thought often about the past, about the way she used to laugh more, about the sound of her husband's footsteps in the hall, about the warmth of family dinners when the house was full. She missed the noise, the chaos, the life. Now, the only sound was the ticking of the clock, marking each second as if it mattered more than it should. It was during one of these long, quiet evenings that she found herself standing in front of the bookshelf, fingers tracing over the spines she knew so well. And there it was, the atlas. She hadn't opened it in years. With a slow breath, she pulled it down, the weight of it heavier than she remembered. Sitting at the table, she opened to a page she had always loved, the western coast, the endless blue of the ocean stretching out from California. She closed her eyes and let herself dream, just for a moment, of standing on that beach, of feeling the sand beneath her feet. But when she opened her eyes, the house was still the same. She was still the same. 75. Too old for dreams, she thought. And yet, something inside her stirred. The next week passed like the others before it, slow and quiet, with the same patterns Evelyn had known for years. But that small stirring, that flicker of something just beneath the surface, wouldn't go away. It was faint, like the soft hum of a song she couldn't quite remember, but it lingered. Each time she walked past the table where the atlas now sat, open to the page of the West Coast, her eyes would fall on it, and for just a second, she would wonder, what if? It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind that seemed made of nothing in particular, when everything began to change. Evelyn had forced herself out of the house to attend a small gathering at the community center, something she hadn't done in months. They were offering a gardening workshop, and though she knew everything they would teach, it was an excuse to be around people, even if only for an hour. The room was bright, filled with rows of folding chairs and tables lined with potted plants. Evelyn took a seat in the back, close to the door, just in case she felt the need to slip away unnoticed. She listened quietly, nodding politely, not really engaging. But near the end, as the group was invited to mingle and share tips, a woman with silver hair and a lively smile sat down beside her. "I haven't seen you here before," the woman said. "I'm June." Evelyn smiled softly. "I've come a few times, but it's been a while. I'm Evelyn." June leaned in, her voice light. "I don't know about you, but I come more for the company than the gardening." Evelyn let out a small laugh, surprised at how natural it felt. Maybe that's what I needed too. They talked for a while, about the plants, about the weather, about small things that didn't seem to matter but somehow did. Then, another woman joined them, a tall, graceful lady named Doris, who June seemed to know well. The three of them chatted, and for the first time in what felt like years, Evelyn felt included, seen. As the afternoon ended, June mentioned something that caught Evelyn's breath. Doris and I were talking about taking a little trip. Something we've both wanted to do for years. Just as girls, you know? Before we get too old for that kind of nonsense. Doris chuckled. Speak for yourself, June. I plan on never getting too old. Evelyn smiled, but the words stayed with her. A trip. A real trip. She hesitated, then asked, Where were you thinking of going? June's eyes sparkled. We thought about driving along the coast. California, maybe. I've always wanted to see the Pacific. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the world narrowing to that single moment. The map in her mind, the dream she had nearly buried, all of it rushed back. Evelyn's voice was soft, almost a whisper. I've always wanted that too. And just like that, something opened. The following days were filled with a strange, unfamiliar energy, a quiet excitement that stirred in Evelyn the moment she opened her eyes each morning. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, but steady, like a slow tide pulling her gently towards something new. For so long, her life had been about sameness, about careful routines and predictable days. But now, there was talk of change. Real change. June had called her the day after the gardening workshop. I haven't stopped thinking about what you said, she began, her voice bright. About wanting to see the Pacific too. We should do it, you know. Life's too short to keep waiting. Evelyn's heart had fluttered. She wasn't sure if it was fear or joy, maybe both. I don't even know where to begin, she replied, her voice quieter, hesitant. That's the fun of it, June said. We'll figure it out together. You, me, and Doris. We can start small, pick dates, see what we need. It doesn't have to be fancy. They met at a local cafe that Saturday, the three of them sitting at a small table near the window, papers spread out in front of them, maps, travel brochures, notes scribbled on napkins. It felt like something from another life, something young people did, planning an adventure. Evelyn sat back for a moment, watching June and Doris talk, and she felt a strange warmth rise in her chest. She belonged here, with them. As they talked, the plan began to take shape. They would rent a car, something comfortable, something big enough for their bags and their hopes. They'd drive down the coast, taking their time, stopping in small towns, visiting places they had only ever seen in magazines or on television. No deadlines, no schedules, just the open road and each other. But even as the excitement grew, so did Evelyn's doubts. That night, she sat at her kitchen table, the atlas open again. Her eyes traced the path they had spoken about, her finger resting on the edge of the Pacific. Could she really do this? Could she leave the safety of her quiet life, even for a while? There was comfort in the known, even if it was lonely. She thought about all the reasons to say no. The cost, the long drives, the fear of the unexpected. But then she thought about the alternative, another season passing in silence, another year marked only by birthdays and holidays spent mostly alone. She didn't want to be alone anymore. The next morning, she called June. I'm in, she said, her voice stronger than she expected. Let's do it. June laughed, full of life. That's what I wanted to hear. And just like that, Evelyn's world shifted. There was no turning back now. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Evelyn had experienced in years. For the first time in what felt like forever, she had something to look forward to, something more than the usual doctor's appointments or family check-ins. Each day brought small tasks, little details that slowly pulled her further from the shadows of solitude and into the light of anticipation. June was the most enthusiastic of the three, always calling with updates, ideas, and questions. I found a place where we can rent a nice car, she said one morning, her voice bubbling through the phone. It's got enough room for all of us, and it's automatic, easy on the knees. Doris chimed in during their weekly coffee meetups, bringing lists of things they might need, snacks, maps, comfortable shoes, and of course, a camera. We'll want to remember everything, she said, tapping her pen on the notebook she carried everywhere. Evelyn found herself swept into the current of their energy, but still, there were moments when doubt crept in, curling around her heart like a lingering chill. She hadn't traveled in years. What if something went wrong? What if she became a burden? What if she simply didn't belong in this new version of her life? One afternoon, standing in her bedroom, she opened her closet and stared at the clothes hanging neatly in a row. Most of them were plain, practical pieces chosen more for comfort than style. But tucked in the back was a light blue dress she hadn't worn in years, one Margaret had helped her pick out for a special occasion long forgotten. She pulled it out, running her fingers over the soft fabric, and smiled. Maybe it was time to wear it again. She began to make her own list, carefully writing down the things she would need. A small suitcase, easy to carry. Her favorite scarf. The book she'd been meaning to finish. And, almost as an afterthought, she added, courage. When the day finally came, the morning was crisp, the sky clear and open, as if the world itself was giving them permission to go. June arrived first, honking from the driveway with a grin that stretched from ear to ear. Doris followed shortly after, her arms full of snacks and maps, already talking about the first stop they'd make. Evelyn stood at the door for a moment, her suitcase by her side, heart pounding. She looked back into the house, the quiet rooms, the familiar shadows, and took a deep breath. This was her home, her past, but not the place she wanted to stay forever. She stepped outside, locking the door behind her, and walked toward the car where her new friends waited. As the car pulled away, she felt something lift, the weight of fear, of years spent believing her life had settled for good. The road stretched out before them, endless and inviting. And Evelyn, for the first time in a long time, felt free. The hum of the road beneath them was steady, almost soothing, as they drove along winding highways that seemed to stretch forever. The windows were cracked open, letting in the crisp coastal air that smelled faintly of salt and pine, and the sun danced across the dashboard in golden patterns. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat, her hands resting on her lap, her heart light in a way she hadn't felt in years. June drove with easy confidence, her sunglasses perched on her nose, humming softly to an old tune playing on the radio. Doris sat in the back, flipping through a guidebook, occasionally pointing out places they might want to stop. Their laughter filled the car, the kind of warm, unguarded laughter that comes from feeling safe, from feeling known. They shared stories, some old, some new, about childhoods long past, about the people they had loved, about the strange and beautiful ways life had surprised them. Evelyn found herself talking more than she expected, her voice steady, her words flowing easily. She spoke about her husband, about the dreams she had once tucked away, about the little girl who used to trace maps with her fingers and imagine the world. Each town they passed through was a discovery, each stop a small adventure. They visited roadside diners where the waitresses called them sweetheart and served coffee in thick, chipped mugs. They walked through antique shops, laughing over odd trinkets and memories stirred by forgotten objects. They stood at the edge of the cliffs, the ocean roaring below, and let the wind whip through their hair, their arms stretched wide like they were ready to fly. Evelyn found herself watching her friends closely, not out of doubt, but out of wonder. June, with her quick wit and endless energy, always ready with a plan or a joke. Doris, calm and thoughtful, seeing beauty in the smallest things, always carrying that notebook, always writing something down. And herself, she was seeing a different version of herself now, one that was open, alive, present. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange and pink over the horizon, they stopped at a small beach, pulling off the road just to sit and watch. They didn't speak much, didn't need to. Evelyn sat on a blanket, her legs stretched out before her, toes digging into the cool sand. The waves moved in slow rhythm, and for the first time in years, she felt no weight, no urgency, no fear. Just peace. This, she thought, is what I was missing. Not just the places, not just the sights, but this feeling of belonging, of sharing, of knowing that she didn't have to carry everything alone. As the stars began to appear, one by one, she looked at her friends and smiled. She wasn't alone anymore. And she never would be again. The final stretch of the journey brought with it a quiet excitement, a kind of stillness that wasn't silence, but reverence. They were nearing the coast, the very place Evelyn had dreamed of since she was a little girl, staring at faded maps and imagining what the ocean might look like. what it might feel like to stand before something so vast, so endless. And now, after 75 years, after decades of waiting, wondering, and nearly giving up, she was almost there. June slowed the car as they approached the scenic overlook, a winding road lined with tall trees that gave way to glimpses of blue beyond. The sound of the ocean reached them before the sight, a low, rhythmic roar, steady and deep, like the heartbeat of something ancient and alive. Evelyn sat forward, her eyes wide, her hands gripping her knees, hardly breathing. Doris reached over from the back seat and gently touched her shoulder. "We're here," she said softly. The car pulled into a small gravel lot, and the three women stepped out, the breeze immediately wrapping around them, cool and salty, carrying with it the distant cries of seagulls and the endless murmur of waves meeting shore. Evelyn stood still for a moment, her feet planted firmly on the earth, her eyes drawn to the horizon where the sky met the sea in a blur of light and color. It was more beautiful than she had ever imagined. The water stretched out in every direction, shimmering under the late afternoon sun, powerful and calm all at once. They walked slowly down the path that led to the beach, the sand soft beneath their shoes, the air filled with the scent of salt and something almost sweet, freedom, maybe. June and Doris stayed close, letting Evelyn take her time, watching as she moved toward the edge of the water. She slipped off her shoes, the sand cool against her skin, and stepped forward, the ocean lapping gently at her toes. She stood there, her dress fluttering in the wind, eyes closed, letting the sound and the scent and the feeling wash over her. Tears welled up, not from sadness, but from something deeper release. All the years she had spent believing this moment would never come, all the time she had told herself it was too late, all the fears that had held her in place, they melted away with the tide. Doris snapped a photo from behind, capturing Evelyn in that quiet, perfect moment, standing at the edge of her childhood dream, now real, now hers. After a while, June joined her, their arms linking naturally. "It was worth the wait, wasn't it?" she asked, her voice soft. Evelyn nodded, her voice caught in her throat. "More than I ever thought it could be." They stayed until the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and crimson. And as they walked back up the beach, hand in hand, Evelyn knew something with absolute certainty. She was not too old for dreams. And she was not alone. The road home felt different. The same highways, the same towns passing by the windows, but Evelyn was no longer the same woman who had set out just days before. She sat quietly in the back seat this time, letting June take the wheel while Doris dozed beside her, a light smile on her lips. Evelyn watched the world roll by, the fields, the hills, the small houses tucked into corners of the land, and felt something inside her settle. Not in the sense of returning to what was, but in the sense of finding peace in what now could be. She thought of the ocean, of the way the waves had touched her feet, welcoming her like an old friend she had waited too long to meet. She thought of June and Doris, of the laughter they shared, the stories exchanged late into the night, the way they had come together not as strangers, but as women who had been waiting all their lives for a moment like this. She thought of herself, standing in the wind, letting go of fear, of loneliness, of the belief that her best days were behind her. Home came into view by mid-afternoon. The familiar streets, the houses she had passed 1,000 times, all seemed brighter, more alive. June pulled into her driveway, helping her with her suitcase, promising they would meet again soon. "We're not done yet, you know," June said, giving her a wink. "There's plenty more places to see." Evelyn smiled, her heart full. "I wouldn't miss it." Inside, the house greeted her with its usual stillness, but it no longer felt heavy. It was just a place now, not a prison. She moved through the rooms, placing her things down, letting her hands brush over the familiar surfaces, not with sadness, but with gratitude. This was her space, but it didn't have to be her whole world. She sat at the table, her eyes falling on the atlas that still lay open. She didn't close it. She didn't put it away. Instead, she reached for a pen, writing something small in the corner of the page she had always loved. I was here, and she would be again. The days that followed were gentle, quiet in a different way, not the heavy stillness of before, but a softer, more peaceful kind. Evelyn moved through her home with a lightness in her step, as if the very air had changed. It wasn't that everything outside had shifted, but rather, everything inside her had. She was no longer waiting for life to pass by. She had stepped into it, finally, fully, and it had embraced her back. She kept in touch with June and Doris, their calls now a regular part of her days, filled with laughter and new ideas. They spoke about future trips, about smaller adventures closer to home, about simply spending time together. The friendship, once unexpected, had become essential, a new chapter in a book she thought was finished. And for the first time in years, Evelyn looked forward to the future, not with fear, but with hope. But perhaps the most profound change was the way she now viewed her past. The years she had spent alone, the dreams she had tucked away, the sadness she had carried, they no longer felt like a burden. They were part of her, yes, but they didn't define her. She had survived them. She had lived through them. And now, she had found something beyond them, connection, joy, and the realization that even after 75 years, her heart could still open. She found herself reflecting on what it truly meant to be alone. For so long, she believed that solitude was her fate, that losing people meant losing herself. But now she understood, being alone wasn't about the absence of others. It was about the absence of hope, of possibility. And she had found both again, in places and people she never expected. Sitting by the window one evening, watching the sky fade into soft hues of pink and lavender, Evelyn thought about how easily she might have missed it all. How close she had come to accepting a life half-lived, to letting her dreams die quietly in the corners of her mind. And she thought of all the others like her, the ones still waiting, still wondering if it was too late. She wished she could reach them, hold their hands, and tell them what she now knew in her bones. It's not too late. Not to dream. Not to laugh. Not to find someone who understands. Not to live. If you stayed with me this far, maybe you know what it feels like to be alone. Maybe you've carried dreams too heavy to hold, fears too quiet to speak. But let Evelyn's story be a light in that darkness. You don't have to wait. Reach out. Say yes. Take the first step, because the life you think is behind you might just be waiting ahead. If this touched something in your heart, leave a comment and share your story. Like this video if you believe in second chances, and subscribe to join us as we honor those who show us that life doesn't end. It just begins again, in ways we never imagined. Because it's never too late to dream. And it's never too late to not be alone.